Today's conversation is sponsored by the Billy Keels Advisory Program. If you want to learn more about how to make your 9 to 5 optional, just go to billykeels.com/advising. Once again, that's billykeels.com/advising.
You're listening to the Going Long podcast, the #1 podcast for the strategies, tactics, and actions high wage earners need for living an intentionally designed life of wealth and resilience.
Welcome to the Going Long podcast. We're back once again to continue to help to educate you so you feel much more comfortable as well as confident in building the wealthy and resilient life that you want to get to and do that much, much faster. I'm your host, Billy Keels, and I'm really looking forward to welcoming you back because that's what I'm doing right now to another fantastic episode. And also too, just want to jump right in and say thank you so much for those of you who continue to leave your honest written reviews as well as your ratings. Thanks to you that continue to tag us across social media, LinkedIn, Instagram specifically, because you're just all over the place. So we appreciate that. And also too, for anyone who wants to check out any of the more than 400 episodes that have already been released, just go to billykeels.com/podcast. Once again, that's billykeels.com/podcast. And you can check out every one of the previous episodes. So, wow, I want to address something today. And this is something that comes up really, really frequently. Either I'm having this with, the individuals who are who I'm currently working with, or constantly having them on calls that I'm having with people that are interested in trying to figure out how to get out of the current position that they're in and get on the life path and the lifestyle and the path that they really want to get on. And it is something that I struggled through for quite a while. Because, while I was in corporate and spent 26 years in corporate, and I really, really liked it, had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. And it was like almost the difference between the first 18 years and the last 8 years, or maybe you call it the first 16 years and the last 10 years, more or less. It was like the tale of two cities. And one of the things that I realized was when I thought that the corporate goal and climbing to the top and becoming that executive that I know that I talked about in previous episodes before, and I talked about everything that I was going through and through the promotion ladders. I think it was actually episode 410, something like that. I talked about that, but also too, there's this constant, once you change your mindset and you realize, okay, like corporate, there's a lot of really great parts about it, great relationships, great training, great access to really, really smart people. There's also another part where when you realize that if you get to that point, I know I got to that point, once my kids were born, had a lot to do with it. You get to this point where you realize, okay, yeah, I really, really like my job. I want to excel at my job. I just am not the title that I have in my company. So I started looking to personally build out my own portfolio of assets that would allow me to have much more control over my time, the way that I employed my time, who I invested it with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and still like my day job, right? And the reason I say that is because while I was in my 9 to 5 and I got to that breaking point after, like I said, 16 years, I got to a point where I was like, look, I want to be motivated. I still liked my job, but I just wanted to figure out how I can make my 9 to 5, like my job, how I can make it optional. Meaning I kept going into the job because it was cool. I was making a lot of money, well into the 6 figures, all this other kind of stuff, and had access to great people, doing the first class travel. And when I say first class travel, I don't mean actually sitting in first class. I mean like the lounges and getting the upgrades and all this other kind of stuff. So, but then I also to talk to you about this in a number of different episodes. You can go back and listen. But I had an event that happened to me or happened for me, which was missing my son's 3rd birthday party. And I've told this story multiple times, living in Barcelona, Spain, which is where I live. And I had to travel to Germany. And while I saw my son in the morning, I missed his birthday party in the evening. And that had a radical impact on me, meaning that it helped me to get clear on the fact that I liked my job. I just wanted to have much more control over my time and the way that I employed my time. And so I was really running towards, in the way that Tony Robbins talks about it, is I was running towards this pleasurable life and being able to build that life and be able to build it in a way that was going to be fantastic and be fantastic for myself, my sons, and really run in that direction. Well, along the way, as I wanted to be able to accomplish this, I started realizing that, hey, listen, I wanted more control over my time, definitely the way that I was employing the time. And at the same time, I knew that the reason that I was running to that is I knew that I wanted my kids, I wanted my sons to be able to look at me and be like, hey, look, daddy's actually able to be at the sporting events, or daddy's able to be here at the house when we need him to be at the house. Although I was traveling a lot and a lot of it was business travel, I was always one of those things for me that was really important is I would travel during the day, but I always wanted to be able to sleep in my own bed at night while I was in corporate. Like it was really important for me to get home, be with my family, sleep in bed, be in my own bed, wake up, even if it meant waking up at the crack of dawn to fly to go somewhere else. And so it was really important for me. Like inside, I just wanted to know or wanted to have this feeling that, my sons knew that, hey, listen, there's daddy likes his job, but he's also figured out this other way where he could actually have much more control over his time and do the things that were important for us as a family to be able to do that. And so as I was going through these first 16 years, and then you start getting into the last 10 years, but probably around year 2 or 3, started really realizing that like this was going to be a lot of work. Like it was not easy. I would say it's simple, definitely was simple, not easy. But I realized that I was burning the candle like so much and not doing it in a way that made a lot of sense for me. I was driving a lot of activity, but I also realized that I got to a point where I was just completely mentally exhausted, physically exhausted, and I knew that I had to do something differently, right? Because once I realized, because I started seeing other people, I started meeting other people, coming into contact with people outside of my corporate job, outside of my 9 to 5. And there were other people that were working in the software industry. They were high paid executives or high paid sales executives, just like me. And they seemed to have gotten like they didn't have like this complete exhaustion and zombie kind of look on their face. And at least, and maybe you didn't see that on the outside, but that's how I was feeling on the inside. And so when I saw that there were other people that were actually living the life and the lifestyle, also being in corporate, I actually talked about it. Like one of those people for me was one of my very first bosses in the very last corporation that I worked for. So I knew it was possible. And so it was just a matter of saying, okay, well, what do I actually need to do? So if I wanted to get to that place, what I decided is I sat down and I realized like I had to figure out how do I make the most use of the time? Because I was, waking up first thing in the morning and figuring out I was going to be a bit exhausted because I was going really, really late at night. So I decided to do something a little bit radical. And this also worked for me because I'm somebody who's a morning person. And the fact that I was a morning person, I was like, all right, well, listen, I have all this energy. So I wanted to be able to go out and create time, like create more time. But by creating more time, the idea is that I could stop feeling like I was constantly behind the 8 ball and that I could actually start to feel like I was really driving a lot of activity, but I was in control of the activity. Because sometimes you can get to a point where you are, especially when you are on a roll and you are high performing and you're in a highly visible type of role and you're building a side hustle. Like that was me. It got to be mentally and physically exhausting. So I had this idea, like, how can I create more time and be able to utilize that time so I can feel like I was getting ahead? So what I decided to do, like I said, I'm an early morning person. So I put together this really cool plan and I thought to myself, well, look, living here where I live, actually pretty much living anywhere because speak to a lot of friends in the States that did the same thing. But here, where I was living in Spain, it was like, hey, look, I got this amazing opportunity. I was up early anyway, but I started waking up like before 4 o'clock so that I was actually active by 4 o'clock. And so I put together this plan. This plan was basically from 4 until like 6:45, 7, let's call it. Every single morning, I started doing a couple things. At this time, I had a really good friend of mine who had suggested this app called Headspace. So I started doing that first thing in the morning. I would do my meditation, and I actually spent the first 3 hours of the day all to myself, for myself, by myself. So I would wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, or a little bit before 4, get started at 4, go through my savers routine. If you're familiar with that, I got that through Hal Elrod, through his book, The Miracle Morning. Fantastic, was amazing. Go through my savers. I work on business, like business planning ideas. I'd start to create content because this was the point in time that I started thinking about or publishing more. At the time, it was on Facebook, and I was doing some stuff on LinkedIn, like walking through the airports. Some of you may remember those early days of me on LinkedIn. And then also I'd read the Wall Street Journal in the morning. Usually had a book that I was reading, and then I would journal for like 10 different pages. But that was going through the Savers kind of routine. If you want to know more about that, you can. I'm sure you can click the link or just look up Savers Hal Elrod. You can find out about that. And so that took me till about 7. Then I gave me time to kind of cool down. I jump in the shower, and then at 7:30, I was available there for the family. So I went from 7:30 to 9. And by that time, I really loved when I was in Barcelona, being able to walk the kids to school, and then also being able to pick them up because they were like teeny tiny guys. And so let me just do the math for you on this one, right? Because this was a way that I was able to gain more control over my time, but I was really generally creating time out of thin air. So think about the first 4 hours of the day from 4 until 7. I was by myself working on activities that actually got me ahead in the things that were keeping me held back, which was working on my side hustle. That's the stuff that I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm spending so much time on this because I was trying to cram it in during my workday. And then I was like, well, let's just separate the two, cram this in the morning and then work on my work stuff. And then that way it also kept my mind focused when it was pre 9 o'clock. I was focused on my stuff. And then after 9 o'clock or 7:30, let's call it, I would work on my company, the stuff that was actually paying the bills, especially in the beginning. And so those first 3 hours, and I did that 5 days a week. So that's 15 hours. That 15 hours, let's say I did it over 50 weeks, 50 weeks, because, well, even though I had vacation, sometimes I took it, sometimes I didn't. At this point in time, even when I was on vacation, I was not taking all of it because I was working on my side hustle. But remember, it's only 3 hours a day. So that was 750 hours. And then take that 750 hours, which was 15 hours a week times 50 weeks. And that was 750 hours. Now you take that over 24 hours, which is the time in one day. And it comes out to, and I'm sure those of you who already have your calculators or you're calculating while I'm speaking, you realize it was 31.25 days. Let's call it 31 days just to be conservative. So by having this plan, I was creating the days and creating a month worth of time because I got up early and would work first thing in the morning. Now, this didn't come, like, it wasn't perfect. There were mornings that I would wake up, and because I was in a flat in Europe, like the floors would creak, or I would wake up, I got really good at it after a while, but I didn't wake anybody up. But there were times where, yeah, I woke people up as soon as I would wake up and get out of bed and these kinds of things. So it wasn't the perfect idea because I was waking some of the family up sometimes, not all the times. But even when I got over that and was able to get the point of creating more time and being able to do it in a way that was much more efficient and effective, I was able to get to a goal where, hey, listen, I was able to get into a much better mind space. I didn't feel like I was constantly behind the 8 ball. In the morning, it was focused on work for the side hustle. And then in the afternoon, there was focus on time for work. And I am going to tell you, and I'm not going to do it in this conversation or this episode, I will do it in another episode. I even found ways later that I could carve out time during the workday to be even more effective on my side hustle. And once that happened, like, the accelerator was amazing. But I'll save that for another day because literally there are pockets all day long in your corporate role, especially if you're in one of those big companies like I was, where you can still excel in your role and be able to have some time for yourself to put into another passion, a side hustle. Remember, I wanted my kids to know that you can excel at your corporate role, and at the same time, you're going to have control over your time, over your life, and the outcomes that you provide for your life. And I think that was the biggest takeaway for me, is having gone through this kind of issue, I realized that there's time that can be utilized better all day, every single day. It's just a matter of about having your North Star, having that right focus. And then from there, being able to, put that energy into a place that's going to be used at best for you. So for anyone who's struggling, like if you know anybody who's struggling, maybe it's your spouse or maybe it's a brother or a cousin, and you know that they're working in one of these high profile jobs. They also are struggling because they're spending a lot more time on their side hustle than they are on their day job, at least mentally and emotionally. And that's taking its toll on them physically. Share the episode, have them take a look at it. But this is a way where you can, yes, you are getting up earlier in the morning, but you're actually, what it's doing is it's helping you create the mental space, and having that mental space and mental freedom, then you can actually have better control over your time. So like I said, this is something that I know that I struggled with. It's something that as I speak to people on calls multiple times a week, that they struggle with being torn between the two things. It may sound like a really radical idea, but trust me, when you are in the right headspace and you have your mind focused, your body's focused, you could probably work forever, especially when you're working on something that you enjoy. Then something else comes into place. You have to understand when to set boundaries, how to set those boundaries. And also, like I said, and I'm sure I'll do this in another episode, talk about the way that you can find pockets of time during the workday. It's a secret, everybody. Don't let everybody know. Well, yeah, you can tell. But I'll talk about that in another episode. So listen, while I'm preparing for the next episode, take today's content, share it with family, share it with friends. Really appreciate that. So go out, make it a great day. And thank you very much. Today's conversation was sponsored by the Billy Keels Advisory Program. If you're looking to make your 9-to-5 optional and need some help, just go to billykeels.com/advising. Once again, that's billykeels.com/advising.